Hello and welcome back to Sharks Happen. On today's show we're going to go over a couple of swimmer attacks, we're going to go over a couple of surfer attacks, we'll finish out the show with the pretty famous woman being bitten by a shark when she was pretty much doing her job. So another workplace injury situation, and it's going to be a great show. Hope you stick around. Okay, we're going to start out over at Satellite Beach, and this is over in Florida. And the date on this is October 20th of 1999. David Hunt, he is out doing some noontime surfing. He says he has taken a couple waves in, and at noon he is in the process of paddling his way back out. He's on his way out and he notices a 9-foot lemon shark come in and just latch onto his right wrist. And he ends up having a watch. It's a gold and silver watch, but he's got it on his right wrist. And he says this thing hit his arm so hard, he's on top of his board, and his hand was under the water, and it grabbed his arm and pulled on it so much that it dislocated his shoulder. And now the shark is taking his hand and trying to take him under the board, trying to take him right underneath the board. And he's on top of the board and on top of the shark's hand. He's teeter-tottering on the board, on the shark. So shark got his back out of the water and he's teeter-tottering on that as the shark is thrashing its tail up out of the water behind it, trying to get his arm up underneath there. He says he finally ripped his hand out of the shark's mouth, and the shark swam off and he paddled his way in. He said he ripped his hand out of the shark's mouth and it was so much pressure that it spun the board 180 degrees, flipped it the other way. And then he just paddled his way in. He says that he tried to make a fist and he couldn't, that his knuckles were kind of clacking together, so a bunch of the bones were exposed and bouncing off each other. He ends up with I believe it's 140 stitches to his hand, and the stitches ended up being put in. They couldn't operate for 3 weeks. 3 weeks after his hand was ripped out of the shark's mouth, they were finally able to operate, and they had to attach tendons and everything, but he already had full use of his hand again. So a crazy story that this lemon shark, definitely after that flash from his watch, there's no question in my mind that's what it was doing, and just took him with it. It's kind of like that guy that was splashing around in the water when his buddy told him don't do that over in the Everglades, and he's splashing his hands in the water and he did the right and did the left. Then that lemon shark, about the same size, 9-foot lemon shark is what had a hold of this guy. So that looked like about a 9-footer that had that guy in the boat and pulled him off the boat, and the guy kind of jumped right back into the boat as fast as he went out. Fastest I ever seen somebody. I didn't think you could get back in a boat that fast, but I can see how fast you possibly can now by watching that guy that got pulled out of the boat. So that's the story of David Hunt. An attack, not an attempt to predate. He didn't see any bait fish in the water at the time, and the water was pretty clear, so it must have just been that the shark was going after that flash of sunlight off of his watch and grabbed a hold of his hand good. And lemon sharks aren't known for being very aggressive. If you pretty much have to bump into them or do something to them to be able to have that, or have that shiny thing sitting there in the water. So take your chains off, take your watches off when you go into the water. Most people that go in the water all the time always know about it, but if you're visiting shores and going out in the water, take all your jewelry off. Keep it at the hotel, do whatever, don't take it with you. Story of David Hunt, we'll move on. Okay, now we're going to head over to Sacimba do Padre Beach, which is over in Brazil. The date on the attack is February 14th of 2019. Carlos de Oliveira, he is 31 years old. He is out doing some surfing. It's 5:30 in the evening, no telling distance from shore, depth of the water, but he's in the water and it sounds like he's surfing along or paddling, one of the two, and he runs into a shark. Runs into a lemon shark. They don't say what size the shark was, and they do say that the shark was probably in there feeding on sardines, which go close to shore at that time of the year over in Brazil. especially at that beach. There'll be a bunch of sardines in there, and just like over in the shark attack capital of the world there, New Smyrna, you got a bunch of bait fish in the water, you got sharks in the water, you got people in the water, there's going to be accidental bites. And this is an accidental contact. They actually bumped into each other, and the shark opened its mouth. Didn't bite him, but one of his teeth scraped his face. So his face was right at the shark's face, a lemon shark, which is a scary looking shark. Doesn't look like the friendliest little dude. And he ended up getting one tooth mark in his face, on his cheek, right about there. I don't even know that it took a stitch. He went in for, minor care, but it doesn't sound like this was a very bad collision at all. That's why I think he might have been paddling to be able to have that shark open its mouth and nick him in the face, but it didn't try to bite him. And like I said, lemon sharks, unless you're really provoking them, they usually, or they see the flash like in the last story, they're usually docile and they aren't going to bother you. So that's two lemon shark stories in a row. This one is not an attack. It's an injury by a collision with the shark, a complete accident. It isn't even an accidental bite. It's just the shark was startled by what had happened and opened its mouth. Didn't bother to close it, so we're not going to put this down as an attack. Okay, now we're going to head over to the southern end of the Great Barrier Reef, and that is in Queensland, Australia. The date is March 5th. Of 1996. Jean Hotchkiss, 47 years old. She is out taking a morning swim. She said she's out in the water and she's doing this natural breaststroke. And she says she looks down to the right and she is just horrified. There was a large, like a 15-foot tiger shark right next to her. So like with Hannah McGall, you look and you see this giant shark right next to you when she was in 8 foot of water on a board. And this one, she's swimming along, and you look next to you, and there's a 15-foot tiger shark there. She says she didn't have time to do anything, and the shark had turned and clamped on her arm. And she screamed as loud as she could as soon as it grabbed her arm, and the shark opened its mouth, and she just pulled her arm out of the shark's mouth after it opened its mouth. The shark had swam off, but she didn't realize she was also bit in the thigh by this shark. So it must have bit her in the thigh after it released her arm and headed off, and she was able to swim 200 yards back to shore. She gets back to shore and she has to walk up to the resort that she's staying at, and luckily there was a U.S. doctor staying there, and he had applied tourniquets so that she could get in and get her life saved. So she ends up surviving this attack. She was bitten twice. She has to go in for surgeries. It doesn't sound like anything was removed, but she was bitten severely in the arm and had a bite to the leg. She said the size of the shark's mouth was as wide as a chair. So you have a 15-foot tiger shark, it's like that black and white clip. That is a huge mouth sideways. If the tiger shark got to 23 feet like a great white does, the mouth would be just outrageously big. It does, I think, have the biggest mouth for the size of the shark in the shark world, other than like, your whale shark that has that huge opening like they do. And a basking shark's got a weird mouth. So we'll take those two plankton feeders out of the situation. And that's our story of Jean Hotchkiss, an attack, not an attempt to predate, by a 15-foot tiger shark that she seemed to have scared off of her arm by screaming as loud as she could, which is what sounded like what happened. So we'll put it down not as an attempt to predate, and 15-foot tiger shark. Okay, real quick, we're going to head over to New Zealand, just to New Zealand. We don't know where off in New Zealand. I wasn't able to find a clip on this one. I was just able to find the attack in the usual shark data places where you'd find lists of attacks. And Charles Wadra was over in New Zealand, and this is sometime in December of 1996. And he was with a party of spear fishermen. He disappeared, and all that they recovered was his shark-bitten spear. So they ended up getting a spear gun that ended up being bitten by a shark, whatever took him. They don't identify the shark. He disappears. Put this down as an attack, a predation. We just don't know what kind of shark, but we know it's over 6 feet. Okay, now we're going to head over to Chatham Island, and that is over in New Zealand. The date is September 6th of 1996. Vaughn Hill. He is 23 years old. He is a commercial fisherman, and on this day he is diving for paua. Not only is he diving for the paua, he has got a new boat buoy. And the boat boy is nervous about being into the shallow waters. So he's swimming the paua out that he collects. He's swimming that out to the boat instead of having the boat be there in the shallows with him. He figures the guy is a little nervous about being in the shallows, being brand new. So he swims out, gives him the paua, and he swims back. He's about 100 yards from shore. He's in about 10 feet deep water, and it's murky water, and it's about 10 o'clock in the morning. Vaughn is about to dive down, and he says he looks down into the water and he's looking at the dirty eyeball, so that's probably with the murk in the water, and the open mouth of a great white shark. He said he knew it was a white pointer, and he says as the shark closed its mouth, he was thinking nothing other than getting up and getting some air. You know, you're free diving to collect this stuff. And he's got to get up and get some air, he says, to fight this thing off. Sounds like it bit his right arm first. And he says as he's swimming up to the surface, he goes ahead and sees blood up above him. Says that the blood in the water floats. It's lighter than water, so blood will float. So he's already looking up at blood above him as he's swimming up to the surface, and he passes out before he even makes it to the surface. He gets on the surface and he wakes back up. And now he's looking around for the shark. He sees the boat boy and he calls over for him, so the boat's on its way over to him. He says he just took a second to yell to him, and he's looking around for the shark. Didn't know the damage the shark had done to him yet. Now the boat boy gets over to him, and he's got another diver in the water that's about 100 yards from him away from there. And that other diver is watching as the boat boy pulls up and puts a rope around Vaughn, but can't pull him up into the boat. So what he does is he drives the boat, dragging Vaughn over to his buddy, the other diver, and they both get him up and into the boat. Now, in the meantime, from Vaughn's perspective, he's sitting there in the water, and he says he can see the boat coming, and he's trying to yell for it, but his screams are getting fainter and fainter. He's losing energy. He's lost a lot of blood. And the boat finally gets over to him, and he says he first of all was reaching for the line, and he couldn't, his arms wouldn't work for some reason. He had ended up being bit in both arms. He couldn't get his arms to work, and then he says he couldn't grab the boat boy. So the boat boy was obviously reaching for him, and he couldn't grab for him, and he dropped his iron that you pry the paua off of the ground with, off of the floor with. He dropped that iron. He says, you don't drop your tools of the trade. He says, but I couldn't get my hand to get it. I wanted to grab it, but I couldn't. He goes in, they get him up onto the boat. He passed out when he missed getting the boat boy, and the next thing he knows, he's woken up again, and he's on the deck of the boat. Now he's been bitten in the arm, and his right arm ended up being amputated above the elbow. And his left arm was bitten bad enough that he only had 70% use of it. He lost 30% use of his left arm from that point on, and the right arm had to be amputated. He had a bad bite to his back, so this shark came up and just tore him up. A white pointer, they say, and I'm thinking that it got both of his arms in that first bite when it bit down. When he says he was looking at the shark and it bit him down, your instinct is to put your arms out. So, he goes in and he ends up surviving this attack, but it's just a terrible ordeal. And you're working, like I say, it makes it even worse that you're out there for your job. It's not like you're out there having a good time. You're out there kind of working for your livelihood, and you have to worry about something like that happening. It's like a workplace injury with something alive that might eat you. I'm not going to put it down as an attempt to predate. The shark left him alone. After it took the arm and bit him in the back, he didn't really realize he was bitten in the back, but it wasn't, there was the deep bite to the back, and it said that the cuts were like they were thrashed around, but it wasn't a removal of flesh back there, and it removed his arm and bit his other arm, but he still has the arm, and he has 30% of it, so it took his one arm and bit him in the back. So it seems like it's a territorial thing. You're in those surf waters, And it seems like that kind of a thing where you got hit by the same thing that the surfers do, a shark that wants you out of its area more than one that wants to feed you. So attack, not an attempt to predate. Great white shark, we just don't know exactly what size. Okay, now we finish out our unprovoked attacks. We are going to head over north of Ras Mohammed National Park, and that is over on Sinai Peninsula. The date on this attack is July 23rd of 1996. Martin Richardson, he is 29 years old, and he is on a boat that's heading in from doing some diving. It's a pretty nice sized boat, and they're heading in. It's 6 o'clock in the evening. They get about 1 kilometer from shore, so you're talking about 3/4 of a mile from shore, and they see a pod of dolphins. So they stop the boat. Martin jumps in to swim with these dolphins. He jumps in, he's at the surface, and the water's about 400 meters deep, so you're talking over 1,000 feet deep, well over 1,000 feet deep. 3/4 of a mile from shore, 6 o'clock in the evening, and all of a sudden the dolphins scatter. They just disappear. Right after that, sounds like he was bumped, because he said that he felt a bump before he saw the shark. It bit him before he saw it. So the shark came up and bit him, and it bit him in the chest first, and the shark punctured a lung. So one of the teeth got in and punctured his lung when it bit his chest. It also came in and bit him under his arm, and he says that was the worst bite, that it ripped the muscles and everything out from underneath his arm, bit him in the shoulder, and this whole time he's punching on the shark to get rid of it. And he didn't know why the shark stopped. He was waiting for it to come back. It already hit him 2 or 3 times. He's waiting for it to come back and finish him off, and he says, and it stopped, and it just left. And he kind of was in and out of consciousness while the boat was coming over, because they heard his screams on the boat. They came over to get him, and he had passed out. He didn't even know that the dolphins had kind of came over and started slapping their tails on the top of the water and chased that shark off. So it's more than likely, I'm thinking this is probably, if not a tiger shark, it's probably a mako. I don't think a mako was going to finish him off, so I think this was probably a tiger shark. And it seems like these dolphins got rid of this shark for Martin, or he wouldn't be there. A multiple bite situation, and it seems it was going to come back at him again, and it sounds like it was on its way back at him when it hauled off the attack. And he didn't know about the dolphins. It was the rescue boat that came over that saw the dolphins slapping the water as they came over to him. So they ended up helping save his life. He ends up surviving the attack, a bite to the chest, a bad bite to under the arm. They had to redo all kinds of tendons, probably reattach nerves. Like I said, the chest and then the shoulder. So he got bit up pretty good, and we just don't know what type of shark. They said by the wounds it looks like a 4 to 5 meter shark, so you're talking 12 to 15 foot shark, 16 foot, somewhere in there. But like I said, if it's a 12 footer, it keeps the oceanic white tip as a possibility, and if it's 15 footer, then it has to be a tiger shark or a mako, which I would go with the tiger shark in that situation. But makos have been known to bite over there in the Red Sea for some reason. They're pretty violent with the people. So that's the attack on Richardson, and we will get to the end of the show next. We're going to end off the show now with one of these workplace injury attacks. Kind of, you don't hear that every day. Hopefully won't be relevant, but for a lot of people that ask about Ocean Ramsey, here's a little story on Valerie Taylor. Ron and Valerie Taylr, they're authors of shark books, and they're famous for diving with sharks. And I used to have, back when I used to have my books when I was younger, I had the book from Valerie Taylr about sharks, and it was a really good book. And Reader's Digest had a good book about sharks back then too, but Valerie Taylr had a good book on them. So her and her husband, they're out in 1980, and they're testing a new camera, some camera equipment under the water. So they're in the water, both Ron and Valerie, to test this equipment. They're testing this camera equipment, and a shark comes up and bites her in the thigh, and she has to go in and get fixed up. Doesn't sound like the shark's shook. Don't know how deep of water, where she was from shore, or the time of the day that this happened, but she had to go in and have her leg fixed up. A blue shark. I get to use my blue shark picture. our video, the blue shark came up and grabbed her by the leg. And this is a shark that most of the time will leave you alone. The only other attack incident we have with a blue shark so far that we have covered by somebody that was diving or something was the gentleman off the Keys. When the blue shark, he saw it only a few hundred yards offshore, which is crazy shallow water for a blue shark, and he swam after it, and I believe he got himself bit when he caught up to it and was like swimming above it. So they're another shark that's not one that I would put into a danger to man, you know, as far as a man-eater, but it's another shark that's going to scavenge, especially when ships go down. You know, the other sharks are probably doing the damage to the body, and then sharks like blues and other sharks that are smaller and less, I guess, less aggressive will sit and wait for the scraps. You know, something that happens in the water where fish wait for their scraps, same type of thing. I don't think the blues go up and, you know, like in an Indianapolis situation, will go up into a group of men and start biting on them. I think they'll just wait. So not a very dangerous shark, and she ends up getting bit by it. But then again, you know, it was a blue shark. It's, what are you swimming with? You swim with tiger sharks, you get bit by one of those, you might be missing something. And you go swimming with those great whites like she does, and it takes one bite and it's mad, you're in trouble. I mean, one bite and all of a sudden you're in maybe a life-altering thing where you lose percentage of whatever it bit. You know, the gentleman we just went over with his left arm that lost 30% use of his arm, and he says he really keeps it out of his head as long as he's busy, but bad days with his left arm not cooperating with him, it puts him in a funk, and you can see why. So not many people talk about the difference after the attack. They kind of stick with the positives of it, that yeah, I'm moving on and everything, but they don't really discuss how that affects you when you're different, because you went into the water, and he ended up jumping into the water with dolphins. Don't swim with dolphins. Not good. I think he ran into a tiger shark, but it's impossible to tell. And so that's the attack on Valerie Taylor. All things considered, hopefully nothing ever happens with Ocean Ramsey or anybody that, you know, goes out and swims with the sharks. And I just do want to say that she's doing it smart. It sounds like a weird thing to say, but anybody that remembers back when the Shark Week was really, really good, the first few years, and I think it was the first year, might have been the second year, but they had, it's the first year, because that guy climbed on top of the whale as the great whites were eating on it. You watch that show, and the great whites are eating on this shark, on this whale, and I mean, they're gorging, they're filling up, they're taking 25-pound bites each bite, multiple bites, just ripping meat off this thing. Then they show the great whites swimming away after they're full. First of all, they look pregnant, they're so big. I mean, that's how much food they stuff in them, hundreds of pounds, as much as they can get in there. And then they swim around like they're drunk. Well, that's the kind of shark she swam with over in Hawaii, the one that everybody thought was a pregnant shark. It was just a 16-foot shark got done gorging on a whale. In that situation, you're talking a drunk shark, and the odds of being bitten by a drunk shark like that are so low it isn't funny. It's so full at that point, it doesn't want to think about dessert. We've all been there. It's like Thanksgiving dinner for them when they run into a whale like that, and that's exactly what you saw. And it's still one of my favorite things I've ever seen on Shark Week, was the way the sharks were acting once they were done feeding on that whale. It was like they were drunk, like they were all hanging out in a bar. So that's the show for today. I hope you enjoyed the show. I hope you'll be back in a couple more days for another show. But as always, if you go into that water, you are much more afraid of those sharks than they are of you.